Hi, good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here at Key West Literary Seminar. I've never been to Key West. And just echoing something that everyone else has said, it's been such a pleasure to be around so many Caribbean writers. It's really been a gift to spend this much time with my peers and my heroes. I was saying to Marlon yesterday that it feels a little bit like all my heroes got up off of the bookshelf and started talking to me. So it's been a real pleasure. So I'm going to read from my debut novel, The Star Side of Bird Hill. It came out in June of 2015. It's about two girls who head home to Barbados for the summer from Brooklyn. Their mother is too ill to take care of them, and they kind of think they're going to just hang out in Barbados for the summer, and all hell breaks loose over the course of that 2 months. So I'm going to read two sections, first the opening, and then a birthday party scene, and then I'm going to read an essay. So yeah, strap yourself in. The people on the hill like to say that God's smile was the sun shining down on them. In the late afternoon, before scarlet ibis bloodied the view of sunset, light flooded the stained glass windows of Bird Hill, Church of God and Christ, illuminating the renderings of black saints from Jesus to Absalom Jones. When there wasn't prayer meeting, choir rehearsal, Bible study, or girl guides, the church was empty except for its caretaker, Mr. Jeremiah. It was his job to chase the children away from the cemetery that sloped down behind the church, his responsibility to shoo them from their perches on graves that dotted the backside of the hill the area was named for. Despite his best intentions, Mr. Jeremiah's noontime and midnight devotionals at the rum shop brought on long slumbers when children found freedom to do as they liked among the dead. Dion Brathwaite was 2 weeks fresh from Brooklyn, and Barbados's fierce sun had already transformed her skin from its New York shade of caramel to brick red. She was wearing foundation that was too light for her skin now. It came off in smears on the white handkerchiefs she stole from her grandmother's chest of drawers, but she wore it anyway, because makeup was her tether to the life she'd left back home. Hyacinth, while she didn't like to see her granddaughter made up, couldn't argue with the fact that Dion's years of practice meant that she could work tasteful wonders on her face, looking sun-kissed and dewy-lipped, rather than the tart her grandmother thought face paint transformed women into. Dion was 16, going on a bitter and beautiful 45. Trevor, her friend and age mate, and supplicant for her affections, was her age mate. Although Dion thought herself above the things the children on the Bird Hill did, she liked the hiding place the graveyard behind the church provided. So it was that she and Trevor came to the cool limestone of Dion's great-grandmother's grave, talking about their morning at Vacation Bible School, imitating their nasal Texas teacher's twang. Accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior is the only sure way to avoid eternal damnation, Dion pronounced, her arms akimbo. Trevor grinned, his eyes caught on the amber lace of Dion's panties as she walked the length of the grave. What do you think happens when you die? Dion asked Trevor. I don't know. It seems to me it's just like going to sleep, except you never wake up. Why do you think so much about death anyways? We are in a graveyard, Dion said. She traced the name of her ancestor while Trevor's hand worked its way beneath her dress, along the smooth terrain of her upper thigh. She liked the way it felt when Trevor touched her, though she hadn't decided yet what she'd let him do to her. She'd let Darren put his hands all the way up her skirt on the last day of school. But here, where girls her age still wore their hair in press and curls, she knew sex was not to be given freely, but a commodity to grandmother's house, taking mental notes, collecting grist for the gossip mill. Because while Hyacinth could safely say that she had been into almost every house on Bird Hill, whether to deliver a baby or visit an old person who was feeling poorly, or just to sit down for a while talking about who had died and left and been born, only a handful of Hill women could say that they had seen Hyacinth's house behind the gallery where she sat with guests. All of them had, at one point or another, been invited to admire Hyacinth's rose garden, which in her vanity she sometimes showed off, going on and on about how they bloomed, the insects that troubled them, her pruning techniques. It could be said that Hyacinth's rose garden, which she tended to like another set of grandchildren, was an elaborate fortress whose beauty so thoroughly enchanted its visitors, they never questioned why they'd never been invited inside. So that's the opening. And I'm going to read from Dion's 16th birthday party. And we were talking a lot about influences over the last few days. And as I was going back and rereading my book, I realized that Jamaica Kincaid's, there's a scene in Jamaica Kincaid's Annie John where there's a girl walking across the tombstone. I don't know if any of you guys have read Annie John, but I realized that that was definitely kind of a precursor of that opening scene. These kids spend a lot of time in the graveyard. Which is not that unusual, I think, for the Caribbean, I think. So, yeah, his 16th birthday party. Dion once had another idea entirely about how she would celebrate her 16th birthday. She and her best friend in Brooklyn, Tanisha, had their hearts set on a party hall on Church Avenue. Everyone was going to be there: Tanisha's Trini cousins and uncles and sisters, their friends from school, mostly Tanisha's, and Darren, the boy who Dion had been going with since he moved up from Jamaica 3 years before. Dion was drawn into the schoolyard romance with Darren by girls who said it would be cute if y'all went together because of the way that Dion's chestnut skin played off Darren's hazelnut eyes, the same eyes that had every girl from Vanderveer to Erasmus fantasizing about Darren looking at them. As Dion got to know Darren on their bus rides home together, her affection for him had deepened, fulfilling the vain promise that brought them together. Since she'd arrived in Barbados, Dion thought of Darren often in spite of herself, though she knew that attachment was the first step on the road to disappointment. After her father left, Dion witnessed a parade of men her mother entertained for as long as they would stick around. But while she could attract men, draw them into her web, Avril had trouble keeping them. In the last relationship, the one that ended the year before Dion started high school, Dion wanted to believe her mother's conviction that her boyfriend, Musa, would marry her. But something happened once her mother made her intentions for Musa clear, and every time he came over after that, he was always just about to leave again, as if her mother's desire for him had propelled him in the opposite direction of her. By his last visit, Musa wouldn't even take his coat off. He just brought the books he promised to Phaedra, the Vogue fall fashion issue he promised to Dion, kissed their mother, and left. Dion had learned from her mother that if you wanted to keep a man, he should love you at least a little bit more than you loved him. Avril's plan to send the girls back home for the summer, announced just 1 week before they left, had ruined everything. The party, working at VIM to save up money for school clothes, Dion's hopes of going into the city on Saturday nights with Darren and Tanisha and her girls. So here she was in Bird Hill on her birthday, Saturday, July 16th. And as her grandmother Hyacinth would say, nothing at all goes so. There would be no DJ making special shout-outs to the birthday girl, no adults hovering in the back alley smoking joints, drinking beer, squeezing past each other to heap their plates high with curry chicken and roti skins, no girls dancing front to front on boys, winding their waists as if their whole lives had made them move this way. Back in Brooklyn, the outfit Dion put on layaway: white jeans with a question mark and gold thread on the back pockets, a matching white top and jacket, still had $20 to go before it was paid off. Instead of wearing it, Dion was sporting the new dress her grandmother made for her with room to grow, a maritime number with a boat collar, white trim, heavy navy fabric. Dion thought the dress more fit for a box of powdered milk than for a girl like her, with legs that started just below her neck, arms made for hanging onto boys rather than pounding nutmeg, hands fit for finger snapping rather than housework of any kind. Bullerman Jean was the one to whom most of the Hill women turned to get their clothes sewn and, in a pinch, their hair done. He owed Dion's grandmother a favor, and so he gave Dion a relaxer the night before the party that left her hair not quite straight. A night of sleeping in hard plastic rollers had given Dion a neck ache, tight curls that didn't brush her shoulders the way she liked, but it would have to do. A lifetime of watching her mother closely had been nothing if not a tutorial in resignation and making do. Now Dion looked around for Jean. She searched first for the elastic hairbands he wore like bracelets around his wrist, and then for his skin that was the color of a ripe plum, a surprise against the whole other Hill people's tones. She wanted to catch Jean's eye, sure that she could register her disdain about her hair with him, but she couldn't find him in the crowd. She took note of the fact that she had never seen Jean at church or at a church function, which in Bird Hill was a way of saying she had never seen him out. The church, more than being just a place to worship the Lord, was where the fabric of the community was woven, public dramas played out and put to rest, subtle lines of hierarchy drawn and redrawn again. If the hill were a quilt made up of its families, Jean and his mother, Trixie's patch, was one the quilter forgot beneath her bed. The party, if it was fair to call it that, was a joint one with Clotel gums, a girl who wore glasses with lenses as thick as breadfruit skin, crinoline dresses that reached her ankles, a mouth that seemed to open only to quote Bible verse. Dion thought Clotel rather unfortunate. And though in summers past the girls played together and ran as far as the Hill women saw fit to let them, now it was clear they had nothing else in common besides a birthday. Clotel envisioned a life as a school teacher and a homemaker, and Dion saw herself working in a fashion house on Fifth Avenue, selecting trends for the next fall collection. In Dion's mind, her summer job selling sneakers and clothes at VIM was a humble but legitimate step toward her dreams. Being stuck in Barbados, a place she might have described as sartorially challenged, was another step a world away from the life of glamour Dion wanted for herself, a life full of style, free of the burdens of her mother's and her sister's needs. These differences, simply matters of style when Dion and Clotel were younger, were now big enough to constitute a wall neither of them could see over. Nevertheless, Clotel and Dion entered the church hall hand in hand, and both feigned surprise when the lights came up over pink streamers, balloons, and a sign that read, "Happy birthday, ye children in Christ." The next day in church, the congregation would sing to them, "Happy birthday, dear Christians." But on this night, both young women were glad to be spared a song, as they were overwhelmed by the smell of food in the church hall. There were the legendary fish cakes women on Bird Hill were known for all over the island, and which no small number of less favored women bought at the bottom of the hill on Saturday mornings. Dion could smell the yellow cakes with pineapple filling and frosting and the milk-soured mouths of the children who ran circles around their mothers. The church hall doors remained open behind Clotel and Dion. The sweet stink of the guava trees, which were planted when an ugly woman named Cutie died and left her small fortune to the church, wafted inside. Both girls were new to the high heels that bore blisters into their feet. Dion was painfully aware that she finally turned 16, the age at which Avril said she could start wearing heels, and her mother wasn't there to see her wobbling or to show her how to walk in them. Dion and Clotel shifted their weight as Father Loving said an interminable prayer, during which Dion fluttered her eyes open to find the Reverend wiping his brow and studying her breasts, which pressed insistently against her frock. After his incantations, Father Loving offered them each a new leather-bound King James Bible. Clotel seemed genuinely excited to accept her gift, while Dion took hers reluctantly. She mumbled thanks to everyone for their gifts and kind words, all their variations on wishing her the best of life in Christ. Then she steeled her shoulders for one of two topics, books or baptism. "So now that you turned 16, are you going to give your life over to the Lord in service?" Mrs. Jeremiah asked, her roomy eyes taking Dion in. She clutched Dion's elbow between two firm fingers. The younger woman felt that Mrs. Jeremiah's conviction about Christ could crack bone. "Yes, God willing," Dion said. Her voice cracked. God's name felt like a word in a language she'd never learned. Dion looked over the jaunty red feather in Mrs. Jeremiah's hat, and her gaze landed on her grandmother and Phaedra. She felt keenly the absence of her mother, who was in no small part responsible for her birthday turning out like this, and should, she thought, at least be there to witness the disaster. The women kept bringing more and more food in aluminum pans out to the blue flame burners, and Dion kept expecting her mother to walk through the church hall's front door. The people on the hill were Christians, and seriously so, but that didn't mean they didn't like to have a good time. Lyrics like "Get Something and Wait for the Lord" were made for Bird Hill, where any news was reason to have a party, and parties could start in the late afternoon and put the stars to bed the next morning. The Soul train line sent women hobbling back to their seats with sweat on their brows and complaints on their lips about their old bones, the young children rubbing their eyes and seeking their mother's laps. Dion and Trevor, who had been keeping each other at a respectful distance till then, came together in the back of the church hall. They agreed to sip out separately and meet at their usual rendezvous location, Starside. They'd named it that because of the way the moon and stars bathed the graves in the cemetery that sloped down behind the church in light, eliminating the need for flashlights that might lead prying eyes to their hiding place. "We'll call this our special place," Trevor whispered the night they named it. And Dion, desperate for space that was not hers, not her sister's, not Avril's, not Hyacinth's, just hers, nodded, thinking he could give her what she needed. A couple hours later, when the sun had long since set and the murmurs of goodbyes were the only sounds in the church hall, Dion went to find Trevor. It was hot outside, as if all the heat had gathered during the day and decided to spend the night. Sweat collected in Dion's bosom, plastering her cotton brow to the top of her dress's wide collar. She'd worn it all evening with the air of self-sacrifice, but now, in the open air, she tugged at its buttons. She took a seat on Trevor's forebear's grave with the gift Bible tucked firmly beneath her, making a show of trying not to dirty her new clothes. "You having fun yet?" Trevor asked. "Define fun." "Come on, Dion, you have to admit that seeing Sister B do the pepper seed was fun." "Yeah, I guess you're right," Dion laughed. She remembered the old woman's shaking shoulders, the way that everyone was genuinely concerned about her teeth rattling out her mouth. "What do you think his life was like?" Dion asked. "Whose life?" "His life." Trevor Cephas Luffing, July 14th, 1928 to July 21st, 1973. "Probably the same as my father's, baptisms, weddings, funerals, more food than you could ever eat in one lifetime." "Same as yours? Do you want to be a reverend?" "I guess I never had a choice." Everything in life is a choice. It's not like you just wake up one day and suddenly you're Father Loving the Third. Dion felt the door close on anything substantial between her and Trevor, but then also the urgency of their closeness in this moment. Dion knew that any man whose life was already decided for him couldn't be hers. But here, where her spirit felt halfway home, anchorless without Avril, she wanted something familiar to be close to, somewhere to land. Have you ever noticed all these people die close to their birthdays? It's almost like the earth remembers them, knows it's their time. I don't know how your mind works, Dion, but I like it. What would you do if you knew this was your last birthday? Dion turned to Trevor and whispered in his ear something reserved for places outside polite company. Trevor was shocked that what he had been begging for all summer was finally being offered freely. He tried to stay cool. He placed a fiery hand on Dion's thigh and did away with her panties with a deftness and care that indicated he knew at any moment she could decide differently. "Go slow," Dion said, warning. She used her hands to guide him inside her. Trevor made love to Dion by moonlight, her bare feet planted on the crumbling gravestone while he entered her with the sweetness she didn't know he could muster. Dion remembered the roughness of Darren's hand inside her, embraced herself for what Tanisha told her would feel like a pinch, and then like the ocean opening inside her. She sighed, taking in the heat of him at her neck and the damp of the night air on them both. When they were done, Dion took her panties in one hand and her new Bible in the other, and let the breeze, when it came, touch her where Trevor had before. She felt wiser somehow, and looking at the church lit up above, thought that maybe this kind of pleasure could be her religion. So I'm going to read a really short essay. We were talking about sex and hookups and all that yesterday, so I thought about this essay that came out in Tin House in 2016. So I'm going to read that. This essay is called Minding the Gap on Sex and Love in the In-Between. Don't all bad hookups feel the same? Pushing and pulling our bodies back and forth across a landscape of anonymity and forced, shallow intimacy, searching for a mouth and orifice to plumb the depths of the void the encounter is meant to fill. A hookup is meant to be about connection, but for me, it requires disconnecting from the self, putting the heart on a high shelf to rest while the body does its proverbial thing. I suppose that it doesn't have to be this way, but I've never been able to put my emotions aside while I get on with it, and I pray I'll never become expert at detaching head from heart from what lies below. I wonder about things you shouldn't when trying to close the gap between my bodies and another. My ruminations are counterproductive, dangerous even, during encounters inscribed with expiration dates and unwritten rules against closeness. The fact that when kissing someone who is still only a body to me, I must look away to make it okay, assures me I'm not cut out for this kind of thing. Why else close my eyes as an unfamiliar lover approaches, except to avoid the blow? My friends and I are in our 30s and 40s and 50s, 20 or 30 years into our working lives. We have careers and are deeply embedded in beloved community. We wonder what the future of love and romance and sex holds for us. Long phone conversations spin late into the night, uninterrupted by the cries of a baby or a partner calling us to dinner. Our words are bookmarked by the sound of a second whiskey being poured or another cigarette lit, or internet clicks that will one day render us too numb for the contact we desire. We call each other often, trying to fill the silence that only adults who live alone understand, and alternately embrace and reject, sometimes in the same breath. Spooling out from a tight-knit queer community formed in the creative cauldron of Brooklyn that was hot before we left it, we were once beautiful and young and believed, though we were never arrogant enough to speak it aloud, that we could have everything we wanted. The awkwardness of this moment lies not only in the distance between the love we thought we could get, the love we believed we deserved, and the solitude we now clasp to our chests like badges of honor or shame, but also in the knowledge, profound, humbling, occasionally dispiriting, that there is nothing in our power we can do to be successful at this game. No changing up our routines, no taking up jogging to increase our chances of quite literally running into our soulmates, no changing the algorithms on the dating apps where we thought we might find our better, or at least our other halves. We nod when people tell us that the best way to find love is to stop looking for it, knowing that it's impossible not to at least try to apply the ambition that works so well in the rest of our lives to this raw patch of uncertainty. Recent years have flung us across the globe to the deserts of New Mexico and Dubai and Los Angeles, the flashing lights of Johannesburg and Lagos, back east or west to the neighborhoods and cities and homes we once fled. Many of us, having tried and failed again and again at romance, look up from our lives and take note that our friendships are the most meaningful, steadiest things that we can rightfully claim. We've mulled over whether we should get together in old age or even before, make babies in communities and partnerships that look nothing like the assimilationist gay marriage models that have been fed to us, plan now for a hopping queer old folks home. We have sex, the boys more often than the girls, who sometimes go months or years without getting laid. But what eludes us and keeps us up at night is love, our pursuit of it, and the way that the chase bruises us. These days, we talk about reclaiming the old school term lover because we like being contrary and find solace in wit when the things we want slip through our fingers, and because we want sex with love. We haven't become so jaded to think that this is impossible, because while we love each other intensely, we know there's something else that we want and that we still hold out for, that there's something different, special, God forbid necessary, and a partner who might one day take us in hand when we most need it, in grief, in exhaustion, in sickness, in health, in lust, in love. Thank you. Do we have time for questions, Ian, or should we cut it? What do we think? One? Okay. Anybody?
I just want to say you're terrific.
Thanks. Oh, Dana in the back has a question.
Thank you. I'll ask the question that I know all writers love to hear. What are you working on now?
I thought you were going to ask, do you write with a pen or a pencil?
Oh, no.
I'm working on a new novel. It's a multi-generational Caribbean American saga, 1930s to 2000s. Yeah, so that's next. It's called Behind God's Back. Yeah. So run out and get it once I finish it. Okay. Thank you, everybody.